Hey all, it's Taylor. For senior seminar this semester, I researched the effects of past tough on crime policies on the present criminal justice system. What are some current issues with the criminal justice system that comes to mind? Maybe mass incarceration or racial disparity, or maybe even high cost of imprisonment. These problems are important to discuss, but the causes of these issues are crucial to identify as well. One movement that contributed to the development of the previously stated issues is the Tough on Crime Initiative. This presentation will explain how this initiative relates to these issues by addressing the effects past tough on crime policies have on the current criminal justice system. Before examining the positive and negative effects of tough on crime policies, let's discuss the key terms relevant to these policies. First, tough on crime is an overarching phrase that encompasses different types of policies. Policies that advocate for stricter responses from the criminal justice system fall into this category. Most of these policies follow a determinate sentencing model, which enforce predetermined amounts of time in prison. The war on drugs is considered the first tough on crime initiative. This initiative made punishment for certain drug offenses harsher. Three strikes laws are those that require a prison life sentence or a significantly lengthy sentence on an eligible third offense when an offender has committed two prior offenses. Similarly, truth in sentencing laws are determinate sentencing initiatives where offenders who commit an eligible violent felony must serve 85% of their sentence before parole consideration. The criminal justice system is benefiting from tough on crime policies in some respects. First, determinate sentencing policies have strong specific deterrents because these policies ensure an offender is incarcerated for a significant amount of time. Some states saw positive effects on recidivism as well, like California, where the crime rate dropped from 4% after implementing their three strikes law. Also, actors in the criminal justice system have positive attitudes toward tough on crime policies. Research shows corrections officers do not prefer to assume a counseling role. Support from the other actors in the criminal justice system ensures each facet is working toward the same goal. Although there are some positive effects of tough on crime policies, research has shown the majority of outcomes are negative. The initial goal of instituting tough on crime policies was to stop the most violent offenders. Despite this, a majority of offenders impacted by these policies are nonviolent. The cost of these policies is high as well because there are more people in jails and prisons serving lengthy sentences. One of the most highly cited negatives of the tough on crime movement is mass incarceration. Both truth in sentencing laws and three strikes laws are seen to increase length of imprisonment, contributing to the growth in the prison population. Even though there was an overall increase in the number of inmates in prisons and jail, the primary group impacted were minorities. For example, African Americans are more likely to receive a three-strike sentence, were unequally targeted by the war on drugs, and have a higher likelihood of imprisonment. Two prominent theories related to this discussion are labeling theory and racial threat theory. The first theory that relates to tough on crime policies is labeling theory. This theory asserts society places a label on people who engage in deviant behavior, causing people to assume a deviant identity and ultimately commit further crime. One example of labeling theory seen in tough on crime policies is through the war on drugs criminalizing low-level drug offenses. Since these offenses are often committed by drug addicts, the war on drugs labeled these drug addicts as criminals. In turn, the addicts may have assumed this label and committed further crime. The second theory relates to racial disparity in the criminal justice system. Racial threat theory posits a large minority population is perceived as a threat to the white population, causing the white population to assert control in the form of criminal justice involvement over the minority population. The racial disparity in jails and prisons caused by the unequal enforcement of tough on crime policies supports racial threat theory's assertions. Tough on crime policies were not enforced equally because those instituted and enforcing the policies, white people, were threatened by the minority population. To study the effects of tough on crime policies, researchers have primarily used surveys and secondary data analysis. The first methodology, survey, consists of several questions that allow researchers to gather qualitative or quantitative data. Participants for the survey are gathered using different sampling methods, such as simple random sampling. Two types of survey methods are questionnaires and interviews. The use of surveys in research on this topic take both of these forms. For the strengths in using surveys, In cases where surveys are given when the researcher is not present, interviewers' presence does not influence participants' responses. Surveys are also cost-effective because they do not require a lot of materials. On the other hand, response bias is a risk of using small-scale surveys. The second methodology, secondary data analysis, consists of using previously collected qualitative or quantitative data and reanalyzing it for the measures the current researcher is studying. Similar to survey, sampling methods are used to gather participants in the primary study. The most commonly used data sources for this topic are correctional data, court processing data, and national records. In terms of strength, using previously collected data allows researchers to build a relationship between past tough on crime policies and the present day issues of the criminal justice system. One negative is current researchers rely on past researchers' implementation of the study, so any limitations of the primary data research are also present in the secondary research. There are two limitations that result from using these two methodologies to study the topic. First, researchers using secondary data analysis and surveys may introduce bias in their study. In secondary data analyses, researchers may feel the need to fill in the data gaps from using data that was not initially intended for the topic they are studying. Surveys are also subject to biases like response bias. A second limitation is the same populations are continuously studied. Therefore, the impact of tough on crime policies on certain populations, such as Native American people, elderly people, and people of various socioeconomic statuses, is unknown. The different actors in the field of criminal justice have their own ethical code. One code that relates to tough on crime policies is the Law Enforcement Code of Ethics. Of the two ethical dilemmas presented in my paper, one of them relates to the first point of contact of the criminal justice system, law enforcement. Police officers are governed by a code of ethics created by the International Association of Chiefs of Police. One of these standards in their code states police officers should not allow personal feelings or bias influence their decisions, directly pertaining to police officer discretion in enforcing tough on crime policies. Despite this standard, minorities are still arrested at higher rates compared to non-minorities when enforcing these policies. Further, some police officers who are attempting to uphold their code of ethics experience an ethical quandary when choosing to enforce policies shown to be racially biased or to go against these policies by not enforcing them. With the majority of research showing tough on crime policies has contributed to some issues with the current criminal justice system, the majority of the 21st century has focused on smart on crime initiatives to combat the effects of the earlier policies. One example is Operation Ceasefire, which instead of incarcerating juveniles as tough on crime policies would, juveniles involved in gangs are instead brought together with the community to discuss next steps. Future research should focus on states that still use tough on crime policies. The reasons certain jurisdictions are still using these policies, as well as the impact these policies are having compared to the impact past implementation of these policies had, should be explored further.